The Iliamna lake monster is known in the English language to locals as Illy, much the same as the Loch Ness monster is called Nessie in Scotland, as Ganoncadet in the Tlingit regional dialect, or as Jig Ignac in traditional Aleutian language. Whatever name you give this unknown entity, it is an aquatic cryptid, an unidentified non-human species reported to dwell in the dark, frigid waters of a lake on the shores of which a small Alaskan fishing village is based. The lake shares its name with that of this small fishing community, Iliamna. Tales that stem from folklore describe a large beast that roams these waters. What has come to be known as the Iliamna lake monster has had many reported sightings over the years. But more disturbingly, it is also something that's been attributed to more than one death of people unfortunate enough to cross its path. But before we get into the main story, firstly, I want to say a big thank you to all of my subscribers to date. This is a new venture, so I'm truly honoured that you include this content in your subscriptions. Now, to that end, I'd like to shout out to just a few of you, but these hellos, as it were, goes out to everybody. So a huge thanks goes out to Revoltine. I'm hoping that the audio is now fixed for this instalment. Let me know in the comments. To Shirley Comer, a happy new year to you too, and thanks for your kind words. To Cara M, Ace and Richter Kennedy, thanks again for your kind remarks and your subscriptions. And lastly, to one of my trolls, James Whited. Dude, if you've got nothing nice to say, then simply scroll on by. Oh, and you can take your insults and you can place them where the sun doesn't shine. Now, for the rest of you who are new here, please do feel free to subscribe and also slap the notifications bell so that you'll be updated as and when new content is uploaded by yours truly. But without further ado, let's look more into yet another strange mystery that stems from the dark and foreboding history of Alaska's dark interior. This is the tale of the Iliamna lake monster here on the flip side. Now, over the years, tales about what could be lurking beneath the waters of Lake Iliamna has garnered a level of intrigue sufficient enough to lure the hugely popular fishing-based television show River Monsters to the region. By many accounts, the monster is reported to be something between 10 to 30 feet in length and with a square-like head that has been used to deliver blunt force attacks onto things such as seals and small boats. Although there is no physical evidence to definitively identify what this entity could be, there are numerous encounters with it to whet the appetite and to send the imagination running wild. Impressive in its size, Iliamna Lake is argued by some to actually not be a lake at all as we understand a lake to be, but more of an inland sea. And it is also located in the southwestern area of the state of Alaska. Now, boasting an impressive 1,012.5 square miles in total surface area, it's the largest lake in Alaska and one of the largest lakes in the country. Now, the lake itself is 77 miles long and has a maximum width of approximately 22 miles or 35 kilometres. Now, at its deepest point, it plunges to a massive 988 feet or 301 metres, and the lake has an average depth of about 144 feet or 44 metres. To round out the characteristics of the lake, it is located at an altitude of about 50 feet above sea level or 15 metres. Now, given the sheer size of Alaska and due to its remote location, access to Iliamna Lake is restricted almost exclusively to the use of airplanes. Travel by float planes is one of the most common forms of transport in the region, given that they can land directly on the lake's surface. No roads currently connect communities on the lake to the surrounding areas. However, during summer months, it is possible to travel up the Kvichak River using small boats. The region around the lake is sparsely populated, with subsistence fishing and hunting being the main regional economy. Iliamna Lake and its surrounding rivers have been inhabited for centuries, with the earliest reports of settlements in the region coming from Russian fur traders way back in the 1790s. But before even then, the lake itself was claimed by the Dena'ina people as their own territory until contact with these Russian traders. Now, the earliest reports of a monster living in the lake came from the native Tlingit people. And these guys, they tell stories of a creature that they referred to as gonakadet. And it was described as a large water-dwelling animal with a head and tail similar to that of a wolf and a body like an orca. Now, the gonakadet was depicted as a fish god and was recorded in pictographs along the Alaskan and British Columbian coasts. Other early reports of the monster came from the native Aleut people, who tell stories of a creature that they call the jig-ik-nak. This fish-like monster were reported to travel in groups and attack canoes and eventually kill warriors. The creatures were feared but not hunted by the Aleut. Now, these ancient stories sparked interest in folks who frequented the area. Bush pilots and fishermen began wondering just what the creatures could be. Many more sightings were reported as people began to fly low over the lake for the purpose of seeing these monster fish. Consistent reports of large, dull, aluminium-coloured fish were commonplace by the late 1950s. With so much local and national attention focusing on the subject, the Anchorage Daily News, which was the state's primary newspaper at the time, offered a sum of $100,000 to anybody who could provide conclusive evidence to prove the fish's existence. The evidence is yet to be provided, as sightings have slowed in recent years. Some of the more prominent and key sightings of this local legend include the following. In 1942, Babe Olsworth and Bill Hammersley were on a direct flight over the lake, travelling to the village of Iliamna. Now, bush pilot Olsworth, flying his Stinson ferry plane, was crossing over an area of particularly deep water when he noticed some unusual specks in the water near an unnamed island in the middle of the lake. Now, as the craft moved closer to the specks, Olsworth was able to see that these were actually giant fish, and as he swirled his plane down to take a closer look, both Hammersley and Olsworth were able to get a good look on the second pass they made, and they later went on to describe exactly what they saw. By their record, they saw what they described as big fish, dull aluminium in colour, with heads that were broad and blunt. Now, the width of their long tapered bodies was the same as that of their heads, and the vertical tails slowly waved from side to side, pushing the fish along. Now, this last aspect of the description is important, because if you imagine a whale's tail which goes up and down, and a fish's tail goes from side to side. Now, spiralling the plane down from 1,000 feet down to 300 feet to get a better look, they soon saw that Olsworth's original estimate of the creature's length, which was 10 feet, was very low. The several dozen fish were easily longer than the floats of his plane, and according to the men, the creatures looked more like mini submarines than fish. The men continued to circle the area until the creatures disappeared in a surge of water, and as the men continued their journey, they discussed and debated over what they saw, and pointing out that it could not have been a whale due to the design of the tail and the fact that the creature never seemed to surface for air. Following on, in 1947, Hammersley published a short piece on the mystery fish in an attempt to get others to investigate the matter or to come forward with reports. Larry Rost, a US Coast Guard and geodetic survey pilot, was one of those who came forward. Flying across Lake Iliamna in the fall of 1945 at a height of 100 feet, Rost reportedly saw what he claimed to be a giant fish, more than 20 feet long, and it was also the colour of dull aluminium. Things seemed to drop off in the sightings department for almost 20 years, when in 1963 a biologist flying over the lake reported seeing a 25 to 30 foot fish from overhead. He reported that it also never came up for air. Now, 2 years later, in 1967, Alaska missionary Chuck Krapachetz had seen the monster twice. Once he was flying over in a float plane and he saw a large animal in the water. He got onto the radio and tried to call some other people around to try and see and verify it, but nobody got there in time. One of his friends, he said, went trolling for it, and he took a 5/16-inch stainless steel cable, put a number 2 tuna hook on it, and baited them with caribou and tied it to the struts of his float plane. Now, he was drifting and sitting out on the floats when the plane all of a sudden gave a massive twitch and a jerk, enough so that knocked the guy off into the water. Now the plane was towed off and he almost drowned, but thankfully made it to the shore, where he walked for miles while the plane was being towed around the lake. And when he finally did recover his airplane, 3 of the cables were gone. Now the hooks on the ones that remained were straightened out, and these hooks were 8 or 9 inches long and solid steel. Now there have been sightings of beluga whales that have gone up the Gravitiak River into the lake, and it could have been possible that that is what it was on this instance. Now almost 11 years later, in 1977, a veteran pilot named Tim Laporte was flying over Pedro Bay, and he spotted a 12 to 14 foot fish on the surface just as it was about to dive down, revealing a vertical tail. Laporte and his 2 passengers, one a visiting Michigan Fish and Game official, witnessed the beast making a surging splash and dive straight down as the plane got closer. Laporte remembers watching the animal's large tail move as the animal sounded, so it was pushing the animal down as it went underwater. Now Laporte and his 2 passengers estimated the creature to be roughly 12 to 14 feet in length, with dark brown or dark grey skin. A local resident, Werner Koljaha, reported seeing a large black fish with a white stripe down its fin in late 1987. And in the following year, several locals reported on the same sighting from the water and from the land of a large black fish with a fin swimming near the surface. Now, most of the sightings in recent times take place near Pedro Bay and the fishing village of Iliamna. Like the events of 1977 and 1988, with the lack of recent sightings, many have begun to doubt the monster's existence, although TV networks such as the Discovery Channel and Animal Planet have managed to feature the monster on episodes of popular fishing-related series. Now, many theories have been proposed to explain what may lie beneath the waters of Lake Iliamna. Biologist and television host Jeremy Wade determined that the monster may be no monster at all, but it may be what he thinks is a white sturgeon, which is a fish indigenous to areas of Alaska and the Pacific states. To support this claim, a spokesperson from the Marine Fisheries Commission is on record as saying, "White sturgeon are the largest freshwater fish in North America and can weigh over 1,500 pounds and be 20 feet or more in length, and they can also live in excess of 100 years." Now, with all things taken into account, and with the sturgeon being a bottom-dwelling fish, it could explain why sightings are rare. Additionally, catching them is considered a tough sport by many fishermen. Most of these ideas validate the theory, although the white sturgeon is found in Alaska and much of the Pacific Northwest. There is no evidence of the white sturgeon residing in Lake Iliamna. Some see this as disproving Jeremy Wade's theory, although based on eyewitness descriptions of a 20 to 30 foot aluminum-coloured fish, it seems to fit perfectly. Many boat owners have also reported that their propellers are damaged by what look like teeth marks, but may actually be caused by a boat running over the back of a sturgeon at the surface, because the backs have almost teeth-like armour plating, which can easily make a propeller appear as if it has been chewed or attacked. Now, even stranger, there have also been stories of people being knocked out of their boats never to surface after having been rammed by whatever this is in the water. This can be attributed to a sturgeon's tendency to jump out of the water, accidentally hitting small boats in the process. Now, anyone being unfortunate enough to be literally knocked out of a boat would definitely run the risk of succumbing to the frigid waters as a result of the harsh and freezing conditions in the lake itself. On a calm September day, a group of moose fishermen sat in their skiff on the lake. The men noted what looked like 2 sunken logs beneath the boat, so they didn't really give them any more thought. They were focused on scanning for moose and watching a family of swans floating nearby. Suddenly, and without warning, one of the swans vanished underwater. In a matter of seconds, the rest of the flock were also, one by one, dragged beneath the surface, never to be seen again. Now the hunters watched with a mixture of horror and fascination as they saw what they had thought to be sunken logs start to feed on these birds. One of these logs was the length and width of their 18-foot skiff and had eyes the circumference of soccer balls. The creatures, by the accounts of the hunters, looked like giant northern pike. Now, Bruce White, a marine ecologist and apex predator specialist, recorded this account. It's just one of many stories of what people have dubbed the Iliamna Lake Monster. Now, Wright himself is not a big fan of cryptobiology, but as a scientist who has studied everything from bears to sharks, he finds the stories of the monsters fascinating. The lake interests Wright as much as any mysterious beast it may hold. Now, what's so intriguing to me is the lake itself. 5 to 8 million adult sockeye salmon come back to Lake Iliamna each year. With regards to the stories of monsters, I was sceptical at first, but I'm not sceptical anymore. Every time I talk to someone who spent time out there, they let me know. They tell me that they've either seen it themselves or they know someone who has. Now, many people from local natives to visiting scientists believe there's something mythical about the monsters. Since well before Alaska became a state, there have been numerous reported sightings of these giant fish. Now, for years, Wright theorized that the monsters might be Pacific sleeper sharks that adapted to living in fresh water. Now he's wondering if they might be a tiny population of gargantuan northern pike. Others have theorized they're giant sturgeon. However, reports of the creature's predatory behavior, herding seals into shallows to hunt them and preying upon schools of sockeye salmon, don't sound like sturgeon's behavior. Now, Wright came to the conclusion that the only way to solve the mystery was to catch one of the monsters. Now, during the course of his endeavours, Wright befriended a guy by the name of Mark Steiger, a retired colonel and former chief aviation officer for the Alaska Army National Guard, who also happened to own a cabin on the shores of Lake Iliamna. Now, Steiger had heard stories about the lake monster, and having both a baccalaureate and master's degree in wildlife biology, he was intrigued, even though he took the stories with a grain of salt. Now, Wright ended up giving Steiger some commercial halibut longlining gear, which Steiger set out in an area of the lake at a depth of about 100 feet. Now, each of the 14 hooks that ran the length of the gear were also baited with the head of a sockeye salmon. Now, he'd heard of other fishermen trying to catch the monsters in the past. Some claimed to have hooked into one of the creatures, but said that no line, including the steel cable, was enough to hold one. Now, after several summers with no action, Steiger eventually had an experience in 2007 that convinced him that the monsters were real. Now, on that day, he went to check his longline set and was surprised to see that his 38-pound anchor had been dragged by something over a distance of some 50 yards. Now, the line was going in the opposite direction and everything was all tangled up. The gangans were gone and severed, metal snaps were bent in different directions and piled on top of each other, Steiger said. Now, halibut longline gear similar to that what Steiger was using will normally hold a 10-foot plus sleeper shark and halibut well over 300 pounds. But some who heard Steiger's story theorized it could have been a seal. The lake has a population of around 400 rare freshwater seals. But Steiger believes that whatever moved his gear was much larger and more powerful than the seal. Instead of resetting his longline, Steiger coiled it up and packed it away. Now that he'd satisfied his own curiosity and decided that the monsters were in fact real, he didn't want to hurt or even worse, kill one. Now, this could be the oldest creature on the planet, and I'm not going to risk injuring one by trying to catch it anymore, Steiger said. And Wright agreed with him. And the men, as a team, went on then to develop an underwater camera system with the aim of filming the monsters instead of catching them. Now, their contraption was deployed for the first time in the summer of 2019. Now, if anything, it's just been fun to see what comes towards the camera, Steiger said. Now, during 2020, there were 3 reported sightings of the monsters, and also in 2020, something big visited Wright's and Steiger's camera and tore off part of the metal contraption that had been baited with a filleted carcass of a sockeye salmon. But in typical fisherman story fashion, the camera had run out of battery shortly before the creature struck. Quite how they knew it was just after the battery had failed, who knows. Now, they do have plans to continue their filming exploits. Steiger and Wright are currently working on improving their camera system and are adding a drone to their kit. Now, Wright's best guess is the monster was a giant pike. Steiger believes it is most likely to be a sleeper shark or something similar. It's evening entertainment, Steiger said, and even if nothing ever comes of it, at least we're out there trying to find out what people have been seeing over the years. And Stiga rounded it out by saying there is something out there, but I'm not so arrogant as to think we know everything about science. After all, new species are being found every day. But how about you folks? What do you think? What do you think is plying the waters of Lake Iliamna? Could it be a relic from the dinosaur era, as some people have suggested, or something more plausible like a giant pike or a white sturgeon? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And that just about wraps it up for this instalment, folks. If you like these stories and want to hear more, simply throw a baited line and snag that subscriptions button, stamp on that notifications bell so that you'll be notified as and when new content is uploaded by yours truly. And as always, I'm looking out for great stories. So if you even have an idea for something that you may want me to look further into, then please, again, by all means, mention that in the comments below. But until next time, please stay safe, stay happy, and above all, stay healthy. And I'll see you again right here on the flip side.